I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and I'm speaking with Madison Hamburg, the director of the docuseries Murder on Middle Beach, which is currently available on HBO Max. Obviously, I understand you can't reveal any specifics about this, but are you still in the process of going over those, what was it, 1,600 documents that you gained access to through your Freedom of Information Act request?
Yeah, it's kind of hard not to, like throughout this process. I've sort of been obsessed with this time period that led up to my mom's death. And I've pieced together, to the best of my ability, her life sort of before and leading up to and the moments after she was murdered. So to have these case files that have exact factual accuracy to what happened or at least, what was found at the scene, and interviews with family members and supplemental reports, it's kind of, it's hard to look away.
One of the things I think was so distinctive about the series is that you allowed us to see your family in such a raw manner, and none seemed to have more tension than the scenes with your father. And I'm curious as to what is your relationship with him like now that the series has actually aired? Because I know you said, that's basically how the series ends. Is there's so much anxiety about what this might do to your relationship with him.
Yeah. The last time I talked to my dad is on camera in the series. I called him to give him a heads up before we started running promo and marketing, so that I could give him kind of the full scope of, that it was a HBO series. And he wouldn't take my call. So yeah, I'm ready to, like you said, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and I'm ready to talk about that and reestablish a relationship with him when he's ready to answer those. The ball is sort of in his court.
So, going back to when you first started this project, how did the idea for this project come about, and what did it initially look like when you were first coming up with it?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. My mom was murdered in 2010. I was a pretty bad drug addict at the time. And I was sort of running from accepting a world without her. And I found myself at the lowest point in my life with my addiction, went to rehab, decided that if I was going to face this, life without her, I was going to make the most of it. It took me a year to get back to school, because I was actually in college when it happened, in film school. And I was a grade behind everybody I started college with. I didn't tell anybody what had happened because I didn't want to be like the kid whose mom was murdered. So 2013, I'm in a documentary class, and our first project fell through, and I took that moment to tell my classmates what had happened to my mom. And film has always been like a coping mechanism for me. My parents told me that they were getting divorced the day before Christmas when I was 11, and on Christmas Day they bought me a Handycam. And from that moment on, I sort of like lost myself in just filming the world around me. It was a sort of escapism at that point, but it helped me develop a language for communicating a lot of stuff that I can't properly articulate. And so in this class, I was really afraid that I was going to lose my mom's memory. I was going to lose her voice, the sound of her voice. I wouldn't be able to close my eyes and picture her. So starting the documentary was a way to sort of immortalize her and sort of work through my grief. And as I started asking questions, I realized that I was grieving someone that I didn't really know. My mom died when I was 18. So this was an opportunity to kind of meet Barbara, not like the superhero kind of archetypal mother figure that my mom was. And to everybody in my life and our house was like where all the kids, the kind of like misfit kids would like come and, hide out. And my mom was always like a mother to everybody. But it was really interesting because there was a lot about her that I didn't know. For instance, the multi-level marketing scheme called the gifting tables that she was involved in, the depth of her struggles with my father, her shared history of addiction and alcoholism with my aunt and my grandfather. So it was sort of, sorry, I'm like digressing a lot. When we pitched this project, it was really important to me that it was first and foremost a story of identity and not kind of a cut and dry whodunit. As a family member of a murdered loved one, it's really difficult. The true crime genre is really difficult because oftentimes there's the urge to fetishize how brutal a crime was or how notorious a killer is or was. And in this really weird competitive nature that the families sort of get lost and the victims get lost. And I think, the difference between, I guess, kind of news and documentary is news has, the topics and the 24-hour news cycle, while documentaries focus on, we have the time to focus on the characters and the backstory. And there's always going to be a crime more brutal and, a killer more notorious, but there's never going to be another person as unique as the person behind the ubiquitous victim photo that you see at a lot of these wakes. And, now a days with mass shootings happening so frequently, it's like trying to make something that's sort of like taking down the boundary between like caricaturized, people in a documentary and kind of placing someone else in that room, with me asking questions, giving more weight to the question, did you have anything to do with my mother's murder? And when we pitched it, it was really hard to sell. It was this like surreal experience for me because I had never been in front of a network exec, let alone pitch my life story. And it was kind of a year of pitching to every network I had ever heard of. And the questions we always would get is, how does it end? Or do you know who did it? Or like, well, this and that. And I was really grateful when we pitched to HBO because it was just like this really emotional moment where it clicked. Like, this isn't a story for people who like true crime or murder stories. This is a story for anybody who has a mom. And that's sort of like, I guess that's an evolution and pretty far digression from your question. So I'm sorry, Charles.
It's quite all right.
But thanks for letting me talk.
Do you feel that there are any positives in the way that the film concluded with no clear answer about who may have committed this crime?
Yeah. I mean, I never expected to find my mom's killer. My goal was to exonerate my family members. I think when my mom died, we realized the importance of staying together as a family and the sort of distance and like that can happen between a really large family. But the unsolved nature of her murder caused a lot of distrust within my family and between people who are supposed to love each other unconditionally. So the positives are there are people exonerated. The questions that probably would have gone unasked for the rest of our lives were asked, and this was sort of the forum for that. The people who initially investigated my mom's case and ignored me when I asked for any transparency were held accountable. And I think actually it is important that it went unsolved because this is a documentary. This is real life, like as frustrated viewers might be to watch the last episode and not have it tied up and wrapped up in and tied in a bow, think about how hard it is for my family, and how frustrating it is, 11 years later to still not have answers. And I think the win, any family member of a homicide victim, the challenge that we have is, one, there's typically no transparency with the law enforcement charged with investigating the crime. And then two, we're people, we're not investigators, it's an impossible task to try and investigate a murder without the tools and the ability to have access to the things that law enforcement has access to. But what you can do is look to the process of what went wrong and hold the people accountable who were charged with finding answers. And I think, if we didn't figure out who killed my mom through the documentary becomes a tool to that effect. And, unfortunately, cold cases are political when it comes to how much attention a specific cold case gets at any given time. So I'm fighting tooth and nail to make sure that that my mom's case is always sort of ever present in the state of Connecticut and Madison Police Department's purview.
Well, Madison, thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to see you on our panel in just a little bit.
Thanks, Charles.